The 1975 New York telephone fire was a cautionary tale of what was to come in the fire service.
As Frank was saying, take this fire, whatever fire it is. What if that fire occurred here? What would we do?
Dan Noonan has saved thousands of firefighter lives. Just what Billy said, of people going and getting checked.
I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, but this is serious shit. And we've got people in command of fires that haven't been to training in 2 or 3 years because now I'm a chief.
And we want to take what we've learned and pass this on to our brothers and sisters so this will never, ever happen to them again.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience. In this special episode, we're joined by Chiefs Frank Leeb and Billy Goldfeder talking about their new book, 30 Fires You Must Know. We'll be spotlighting at least one of the historically significant modern fires in that book, providing invaluable lessons for today's fire service professionals. Remember, like and subscribe, YouTube, Respond to Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. We'll be right back to speak with Chiefs Leeb and Goldfeder right after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
With vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rimley, LCSW, EMTB.
We're here today with Chiefs Billy Goldfeder and Frank Leeb talking about their new book, 30 Fires You Must Know. And we'll be spotlighting at least one of the modern fires detailed in that book, the 1975 New York telephone fire. It's a fire that's not only historically significant, but also a powerful example of the devastating effects of occupational exposure to toxic smoke. So to provide a firsthand perspective, we'll include some clips from our interview a few years back with Chief Leeb and first due truck fireman Danny Noonan, who courageously battled this inferno. And sadly, Danny passed away in July after living with cancer for decades, but his legacy and experiences continue to educate and inspire. Quick intro, Billy Goldfeder, EFO, has been a firefighter since 1973 and a chief officer since 1982. He's a deputy fire chief at the Loveland Sims Fire Department in Ohio, and he served on numerous NFPA committees. He's on the board of directors with the IAFC Safety, Health, and Survival section and the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Chief Goldfeder co-hosts and sponsors firefighterclosecalls.com and also created 40plusfire.com, a website focused on firefighters and prostate cancer following his own experience with that disease. Frank Leeb's the managing director of First Responder Center for Excellence, and he previously served as deputy assistant chief in the fire department in New York, retiring in June 2024 after serving for over 31 years. During his tenure with the FDNY, he held several senior staff positions, including chief of the fire academy, chief of training, and chief of safety. Frank has also been an East Farmingdale, Long Island Fire Department member since 1983, and his career has been defined by the unwavering commitment to fostering growth through training and development, a central tenet of his leadership philosophy. And he's also the author of the best-selling book, Cornerstones of Leadership, On and Off the Fireground. Chiefs, welcome to Respond to Resilience.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you both. Thank you both.
So we're going to kick it off with kind of like setting the background for this book. We've talked about Deborah Wallace's groundbreaking book, In the Mouth of the Dragon, Toxic Fires in the Age of Plastics. It kind of set the stage for looking at the toxic products of combustion from the fires that we're exposed to in modern day fires. So, Frank, we'll start with you. What inspired you to write this book, 30 Fires You Must Know, and how did you select the specific incidents?
Yeah, so Dan was a good friend of Deborah Wallace, and I called her up when Dan passed away, and she had already known that he passed away, because their closeness after the New York telephone fire, when she wrote her book, which, by the way, I'm currently writing a second edition of In the Mouth of the Dragon with Deborah Wallace. Been for quite some time. We anticipate Fire Engineering publishing the second edition in the next year or two. But Billy and myself, we've been friends for a couple of years, and we have conversations that often start off with, Billy, you know what pisses me off? When firefighters don't understand or learn a lesson of this fire. And he's like, you know what, Frank, you're right. And you know what just happened? You know what I just heard about? I just got this email about this. And we've had dozens of, if not hundreds of phone calls like that, or text exchanges where we're just tired of us not learning some of the lessons that are out there, or we have to lose a dozen firefighters to a similar cause before we learn the lesson. And it pains us both when we see departments lose somebody, when we could think immediately, when we hear about how they passed away or were injured, and we can think of a couple of different fires, and then we start thinking of those. And if I say Hackensack, if I say war bombs, if I say Father's Day fire, Billy knows what I'm talking about automatically, and 5 or 10 different points about those fires automatically pop into your mind. And when we were discussing this book, we both had stories of when we go around and teach around the country, where when you say the Wall Bombs fire, or you say the Back Bay fire in Boston, or Vandalia Avenue, that firefighters don't know the history the way we maybe thought they did, or certainly the way we know they should know it, because that's what makes us a more resilient fire service together, when we understand these lessons. And that was kind of the genesis of us. Let's write this book, but let's not be the authors ourselves. Let's find people that have unique views. In many cases, they were on the scene. In some cases, they were family members of them, of a fallen firefighter. Mm-hmm. And I can speak for both of us, where the book has certainly it has exceeded my expectations of how good this book would be, and that is primarily from the people that were willing to write their stories and their experiences of the fire. It is a fantastic book. And talking about one of the fires that we'll talk about today, fire number 5 in the book, is the chapter that Billy, that Danny Noonan wrote for us.
Yeah. It seems to me like you're both also uniquely positioned to do this kind of a book and to have this kind of look at things from the past, with the amount that you've both been exposed to, experienced, and you're seasoned. So the fact that you're looking at things this way is your gift to the next generation. Do you see it that way?
This book is an opportunity. I did 3 other books with fire engineering called Pass It On, 1, 2, and 3. This is somewhat of that flavor, but much more. I think I'm really excited about the book because, one, it's an easy read for any firefighter. Very easy read. Lots of pictures, all that kind of stuff, right? But we start each chapter out, we size up the situation. We tell you about who's writing it. We give you a little. Then you're going to spend time in the book reading from someone who was there or who was directly involved in the incident. And then after that, we give you a lesson plan. So it's a teaching book. It's a learning book. To some extent, it's an interesting reading book. So I really think and look, it speaks for itself. They sold out in 30 days. They're starting the second printing now. So we're obviously very proud of that too.
It adds depth to it that you've got the voices of people who are connected with the fire, who can speak to it from that unique perspective. So I love that about the book. Frank, looking at the book again in kind of broad strokes, like how did the takeaways, or how would you like to see the takeaways affect strategies, tactics, and especially cancer prevention in the fire service?
So the idea of the takeaways is for them to inform your decision making, whether it's your strategies or the tactics on the fire ground, and even before the fire ground, even before you get there, how we should be approaching some of these incidents. And that should be informing each different individual department that reads the book, or individual member that reads the book, because then they have to take those lessons and apply them to their unique fire department based on their staffing, based on their buildings, based on all of the different features that you would do for anything else, right? You shouldn't try and read a chapter and say, I'm going to do it just like they did, or I'm going to do it just like I get asked a lot. We want to be just like the FDNY. No, you don't. You want to be, hopefully you want to be a well-trained fire department like the FDNY. But if you don't have the staffing, if you don't have the equipment, then you have to do it based on what you have. And a lot of times when we talk about strategies and tactics, that means you have to do it sequentially instead of simultaneously like the FDNY was. So the idea is take these takeaways from the book and apply them to your department to make sure that we can have quality outcomes at the end of the day that minimize injuries and deaths.
I was going to say is if we could get everyone who reads this book, especially at the leadership level or the future leadership level, as Frank was saying, take this fire, whatever fire it is. What if that fire occurred here? What would we do? What would our resources be? What would our response be? Then we're 100% successful. It's a template, and it covers every type of fire that most fire departments are going to have. The single-family dwellings, multifamily, that was part of our selection process, was to identify the more common incidents. So go ahead.
Billy, can you talk a bit more about why the New York telephone fire is so significant in the book, in history?
Yeah. I don't think we gave two thoughts about cancer prior to that fire, to be honest with you. And even when the fire occurred, we weren't thinking that way. But following the fire, as members of the FDNY were starting to develop cancers, it really, there's almost two views of this. There's the view of that incident, how it impacted the members of the New York City Fire Department. But there's also the bigger picture of how this affects firefighters throughout North America and the world, but we'll focus on North America. We remember seeing that nasty pushing smoke. And back then, it's an overused term, but they didn't know what they didn't know. Mm-hmm. You went in a tower ladder bucket. You were surrounded by smoke. You breathed it. You blew your nose and had black snots for days. And today, for the most part, the way they operated back then, which was exactly state-of-the-art back then, is absolutely not the way most departments would operate today. Example, if you saw last weekend in Rockdale County, Georgia, they had that factory catch fire, and the smoke was purple and blue and green. No one's going in that. We know that. And in many cases, the senior officers are thinking about the New York telephone fire. And if the younger ones aren't, their bosses are. But that's a very good comparison. And this just occurred a few weeks ago or last weekend. So that's where I think the value is, that it started the observation about cancer. Remember, you could probably find photos of firefighters operating at that fire with cigarettes in their mouths. And again, nobody gave any thought to that. That we smoked. Mm-hmm. Okay. But so to say that we've not seen change is ridiculous. We've seen change, not only through the code process and what's allowed versus what's not allowed, but in fire operations tactics. And while we're, if you have that same fire today and they tell us civilians are in there, firefighters are going in. Okay. But when we pull up and they say everybody's out, we've got purple and green smoke, we're taking a pause, because it's really gone from a working fire to a hazmat incident. And there are no hazmat firefighters anywhere that rush in. They use that planning process. So as soon as we can eliminate the worry about civilians being inside, the incident takes on a different thing. In our business, it woke us up to cancer. And it was really, in my mind, was the first significant incident where we're going, holy smokes, you know what? There's a problem here.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that. So I look at the 1975 New York telephone fire was a cautionary tale of what was to come in the fire service. 1975, there weren't a lot of plastics in private dwellings yet and other structures. But that was a cautionary tale of what was going to come over the next several decades, as we've seen a proliferation of plastics into every single thing we do in society, where today every fire we have is a small version of the 1975 New York telephone fire. And if we don't change our tactics and strategies to match that absolute reality, we are going to see firefighters die on a level that we have now seen, looking back over the past several decades, of what we saw at the New York telephone fire decades ago. So for me, and for both of us, including this fire in the book, when we looked at, we each made a list of which fires we wanted to include, and both of us had that fire on our list.
And we're seeing on all different levels, right? From a large industrial building down to a car fire or a dumpster fire. Any one of those, we could encounter those toxic chemicals in the smoke. So hopefully we're going to see the effects of this fire and the takeaways from it. And kind of moving into that, Frank, could you just briefly introduce Danny Noonan and talk about his role in the fire and then how it led to his becoming an advocate for occupational cancer in the fire service?
Yeah, so Dan was a larger-than-life figure. I didn't know him in his earlier years, but I've heard the stories of when he owned the Bar Suspenders and just a larger-than-life person who lived his life the FDNY way, both on the job and off the job. And he was the first Irons firefighter on ladder 3. And their job was to force entry and find the fire, and they were doing exactly what we would expect them to do. And it cut his career short. And then after that, he became a tireless advocate for decades. He's been advocating for getting checked early detection in cancer for decades, long before most people even realized that this was a problem. That's a seminal fire, and he's a seminal character in that piece to as Billy mentioned earlier, to getting the awareness and being out on top of that. And he would always advocate. He would always talk about that he stood in support of and next to the families of those that lost firefighters to cancer. He never forgot about the other firefighters that he worked with, that he had learned that had passed away. No matter what conversation he has, no matter what podcast, no matter where you see him, he always mentions the families. He always mentions those brothers that he worked with that are no longer here. He even also always mentions the telephone company workers and the other people that were working, that they're often the forgotten about people in this crowd. Yeah. So for me, on a personal point, I'm honored. I'm a better person for having met him. And the fact that we were able to, and we still have now, there's a wall at the FDNY Fire Academy that everybody comes in there will see, and they will always know the New York telephone fire, what its historic significance is, and they will always remember Dan Noonan for the champion and advocate that he was.
Billy, do you want to add anything to that?
He was, I've known Danny since when he had left the job, and then he was out in California as an instructor. And then, of course, he moved back. But just to highlight what Frank said, he was larger than life. He was a character. You'd almost see him on the TV show Rescue Me that was done by Leary a number of years ago. He was that kind of old school, really don't care what you think. I'm going to tell you what I think. And but anytime a firefighter is lost due to something related to the line of duty, the greatest thing we can do to honor them, you can buy T-shirts, you can buy stickers and all the stuff we do. But the best thing we can do is to learn from that. And it's almost like you want to have a little pocket Danny Noonan with you, and you see some knucklehead breathing smoke for absolutely no reason, and you wind him up. The guy goes, he punches him in the head, and he goes back in your pocket. Because he suffered horribly. He suffered horribly. And you wouldn't have known it. He would never have gone on and say, "Oh, I'm suffering horribly." But in private conversations, this was not an easy death by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. And, if you knew him well enough, he would send you pictures of what he was going through treatment-wise. And they're pretty graphic, but also a sobering reminder of what cancer can do to you and what the treatment looks like if you have to undergo it. I would like to move into kind of setting up this fire. I have a clip. It's going to talk a little bit about the location, the building, and we'll play that and then we'll comment on that. At approximately 12:15 a.m. on February 27th, 1975, the fire broke out in the basement cable vault at the New York Telephone Company building, 13th Street, 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. The incident escalated to 5 alarms with 699 firefighters responding, and toxins from burning cables and other materials exposed them to polyvinyl chloride, hydrogen chloride, vinyl chloride monomer, and chlorinated dioxins. The smoke from the scene traveled all the way to Queens, and the next day, even several blocks away on the FDR, drivers had to put on their headlights just to navigate the road. Dan Noonan was first due on 3 truck to this deadly fire. In the decade since, he's been a tireless advocate for awareness of occupational cancer and toxic exposure in the fire service, and in particular, regarding the cancers and deaths sustained by many of the 699 FDNY members who fought this fire.
It certainly is nice to see his face. Can you talk a little bit about the complexity of fighting such a fire in these high-rise buildings?
So 1975 was a time when they didn't really wear their breathing apparatus. Some of the later arriving firefighters at that fire did, which tells you something right there alone. There was no thermal imaging camera. He says in the interviews that the flashlight that he had was useless. He couldn't see in front of him.
Yeah.
The compartmentalization of a structure like that, where they have to go in there in this maze and they have to go down. You're basically going down the chimney. There's so many challenges to a fire like that. He mentions that the building was had some upgrades to make sure that it was better protected. It was fortified, so it had Lexan glass on the first and second floors. That made it even more difficult to enter. So the deck was totally stacked against them. But so they're going in to find the fire, but also early on they had reports of 2 of the employees missing. And as Bill mentioned earlier, when we have reports of people that are missing, that's our job to find these people, and that's exactly what they were doing. So the challenges of finding the fire, the challenges of extinguishing the fire, the challenges of ventilating that building, the challenge of rotating firefighters out. The fire would eventually, pretty quickly went to a 5th alarm assignment, bringing hundreds of firefighters there. But it was still a daunting challenge because of the amount of these hazardous wiring and chemicals that it was producing, and that toxic soup that lingered over the entire city.
With the younger firefighters, we've also never been so educated as we are in the danger of highway operations. Just bear with me. I'm going somewhere with this, so I'm not going crazy here. When we educate the firefighters on highway risk, that risk is immediate. That car is going to hit you now. That drunk driver is going to hit you now. You're coming, the driver's going the wrong way now. You won't see a firefighter out wandering around the highways anymore these days. We're putting a tower ladder out there. We're protecting it because almost every day a cop or a firefighter is being struck on the highways. So there's a sense of it being an immediate risk. Cancer's different. If I'm exposed to some shit today, I'm fine tomorrow. And I get exposed again on Thursday, I'm fine on Friday. The difference, and that's the difference, is to make sure our officers do their jobs as bosses and not buddies, and that they understand that you can't have that exposure today. You need to mask up when the conditions warrant it. You need to wear your gear when the conditions warrant it, because tomorrow you won't have any pain from that. Whereas if you're struck by a car, you're in the hospital immediately and your bones are broken and all that. So the immediacy where the younger firefighter is not going to grab that, that's up to the most important person in this job, and that's the lieutenant or captain. I've always said, get rid of the chiefs, get rid of the deputies. You give me good company officers, and it's going to take care of itself in most cases, okay? And that's what we need, is those lieutenants and captains. You can have fun, you can be, enjoy the job and all that stuff, but you got to train every day. We'll get into that in a little bit. But you got to be a boss. And when you see a knucklehead standing in the middle of that crap for no reason, I'm not talking about an immediate rescue or some of those rare incidents, But when you see that, you as a boss got to grab it, get out of here, knock it off. You can't operate that way. If you're a better boss, they know when you're working with that person, you wouldn't think of doing that because my lieutenant or captain has zero tolerance. How's that?
Show your people that you care and love for them by having a standard and hold them accountable. It's, when in command. If you're the boss, lead. If not, give the job to somebody else that will do it, because leadership is important. And when leadership doesn't take their responsibility seriously, that's usually when we have more people getting sitting there breathing in without a mask on. If the boss says, put your mask on, the young firefighter is going to comply, period. So be the boss.
We're going to move into number 2 clip here. And just Dan talking about the building, and love you guys to comment on, we talked about it a little bit, but comment a little further into the unique challenges that this building posed for anybody responding to this incident. So here's Dan Noonan talking about the building at the New York Telephone Exchange.
Before we get into fire department operations, I'd like to briefly describe the building. The building, as Dave mentioned, was on 2nd Avenue and 13th Street. And you got to remember, this is at a time prior to satellite communications. This is a main switching center. This is 11 stories. It was built to be earthquake proof. It handles tens of thousands of phone calls every hour. And it serves a 300 square block area of Manhattan. In the 70s, they decided to upgrade the facility and make it riot proof with all the demonstrations and protests going on. So what they did on the windows is they took the glass, they put wire through the glass, they put it in reinforced steel frames, and then they took this Lexan, which is a bulletproof plastic. It's impossible to get through. They covered all their windows with this, and then they mounted it in heavy metal cages. And this was the entire 1st and 2nd floor. And this building occupies the whole corner and runs for a couple hundred yards down the block. This place is unbelievable.
So love for either or both of you to comment from a IC perspective, your thoughts about this building. Obviously, back then, it probably had different policies and procedures, pre-plans and stuff like that. But what are the teachable points from what Dan just talked about?
So I think there's a few of them. Certainly, that's an unusual type of fire. So you should take a more cautious approach to how you approach and how you're going to fight that fire. The complexity was really compounded by the reports of people missing. So abandoning the building, wasn't really an option. That was one of the choices that they would ever select there. And then getting enough people there and rotating them, making sure you have ambulances. And then once they have people accounted for is when they did take everybody out of the building. But even that, at that point, right, we have to make sure that when we go to an exterior attack, and this is a lesson good for today, that's applicable to today, is that we don't need to have our firefighters and our equipment marinating in the smoke, especially our equipment. When we go to an exterior attack, let's move the equipment away and let's not have unnecessary exposures, because if the fire truck is sitting there marinating, well, it's very hard to thoroughly clean a fire truck after it's been contaminated like that. We learned that after September 11th when New York City was cleaning their fire trucks, and it was very difficult. So we could minimize or prevent some of that contamination by parking later arriving apparatus down, away from the area. Make sure we're upwind. Just little nuances that we can do that are takeaways. That could be takeaways from that fire where we didn't know that much about that. So those would be the big training, the learning points, and pre-plan those buildings if you have them in your area. And those telephone switching centers, they're everywhere. They're hard to find. Windowless buildings, usually in that 7 to 11 story range. But any medium-sized city is going to have those buildings somewhere. Whether you know about them or not is the real question.
Well, that's your responsibility. You need to know, and it starts at the first lieutenant and captain. They need to know their areas. Get out of the chair, get out of the firehouse, and learn your area every day. You go out on an EMS call, you're already out. Let's take a look at the place we have this call out. What would we do if there was a fire here? You know, I made a note when Frank was speaking. Even today, we're not going to abandon people that we know are inside that building, but it's going to be incumbent on the incident commander to make the go, no-go decision. Another book in another fire in our book, of course, the Worcester cold storage fire, where the chief of Worcester, or the deputy chief at the time, Mike McNamee, made the decision nobody else is going in based upon that. He didn't make that without lots of training and experience. So if your department has buildings like Frank was just like we're talking about, but you have not taken training in large area search, you've not taken training in big box buildings, all you're going to be doing is putting your people into a grave. And I don't know how to be any more blunt about that. If you don't understand that your air pack's going to last 15, 20 minutes on a good day, and it's going to take 15 minutes to find the fire, you're going to lose a firefighter or firefighters in there. So it's more than just what we're talking about today. It's all right. Now we listened to Frank and Billy and the crew here on the Responder Resilience program. We read the book. Now let's go see what we have. That's so critical. And again, if you don't have training in medium to large area buildings, such as what am I thinking of? The big hardware place. Come on.
Oh, Home Depot.
Home Depot. Yeah, there we go. Or any places like that, or a mall. If you've not actually gone there and stretched lines to see what it's going to take, timed your companies, determine the best access, you're going to put your firefighters into their graves in many cases. You're going to send them in. They're not going to get out. I don't know. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, but this is serious shit. And we've got people in command of fires that haven't been to training in 2 or 3 years because now I'm a chief. That's insane. You're setting yourself up for failure. Frank?
Yeah, there's nothing to add to that. You're exactly right. You got to, we hold our people to an expectation, and there's an expectation for the chief officer to know their job as well, right? It's unacceptable for my firefighters to not know their job. Well, they should be saying it's unacceptable for me to not know my job. If I'm not current, or they're not current, that's a problem.
And I'm not an advocate. People say, "Oh, look, the chief's out there stretching hose with us during our drill." Go away. That's not your job. I don't want a football on the field playing football. The guy's too old and has no idea what he's doing, but he's great on the sidelines coaching the team. It's the same thing. You say, "Oh, I love our chief. He's out there throwing ladders with us." He's not throwing ladders at a fire. Get away from that. Get focused on what you do. And they'll say, "Oh, we love our chief. He's out there stretching lines." You may love your chief for that reason. Do you love your chief because he or she has a clue when you're inside doing a large area search and they know how to manage that situation if you call a mayday?
I'm going to set up this next clip, and this is where Danny's talking about making entry into the building. And I think this is the clip where air management comes into play. But those are great points you made about really the limited time we have on SCBA, and especially dealing with a large structure like this. So this is Danny talking about making entry into the New York Telephone building. Now that you set the stage with the fire, what were your duties, or what did you actually encounter as first due?
As first due, when we rolled up, I was part of our forcible entry team. So we go in, and there's confusion, and one of the supervisors, phone company supervisors, bring us over to this display panel. Battalion 6 arrives, they come in, and the display panel is indicating a fire in the sub-cellar vaults, which are like 3 stories underground. And our task is, down you go, fellas. We started going down and down and down. And the further down we got, the hallways were long and tight, like a high school or whatever. But they had the fluorescent lights on the top of the hallway. But the smoke was starting to gather at the top of the lights. So it had a real dim glow to it. And at the same time, the fire alarms like klaxons were going off, like a submarine. And in the process of all this, 5 engine, who was returning from a false alarm, was already in front of the building when we got there. And they're in the process of hooking up. And they're stretching their attack line. They're behind us. We can hear them. We can hear the transmissions. They're behind us. But we got to find it. So we open up the door, and down we go, a short set of maybe there's 3 little staircases, go down several feet, and now we're in 0 visibility. 0. Can see nothing, nothing. There's a lot of chaos. We can't see anything. We're now in a confined space. There are no secondary means of egress. Our only way in is our way out. So we're like, big wall of smoke. And now the polyethylene that was on the cables is starting to melt. And it's melting on the floor. So our boots are starting to adhere to it. So we're sticking to the floor as we go. In our offices, to make a transmission, we'd have to remove their face piece, and they're making transmissions. And I'm saying, good God, they must be taking a hell of a beating with each transmission.
So after watching that footage and listening to what Danny's saying, what's striking both of you in this moment?
The awareness that they had that they were taking those masks off and that they knew they were taking a beating. The fact that they had masks on as one of the first companies tells you that it was a condition that they weren't accustomed to, that they would be wearing their mask at that point. The chemicals that are burning, and at some point later on, there winds up being an explosion of some sort. And when I think about that and all the smoke that's being produced, smoke is fuel. And at some point, if it heats up, if it has the right mixture, it's going to ignite. And that's something that we know today, and we certainly see that often today when we get enough. Again, this was looking into a crystal ball of what we're going to see in the fire service in every type of occupancy.
What came to mind for me watching that is wondering if firefighters are going to be as anxious to go down in that basement as they were back then. And if your firefighters are not properly trained, if you've not trained in underground situations, if your training facility cannot simulate going underground several stories down, then you're screwed. I mean, I honestly, and I'm very pro the young generation and the people today, but I can imagine hearing a story of a crew that refuses to go down into those conditions because they have not been properly trained in doing that. Again, maybe I'm a little off on that. Frank, you can comment, but I wouldn't be shocked if I got an email or something from somebody today saying, you're not going to believe this. They refuse to go in because they've never had any training to go below grade.
Yeah, and in New York City and in my volunteer department, we train on below grade fires often. So that doesn't jump out to me because I know that's something we train regularly on. We get enough sets and reps on that I would expect any member of the FDNY to have no trouble because they've been in those situations in training.
I'm going to move us into kind of a fast forward mode to the aftermath of the fire, and Dan's going to be talking about some of the health effects of the responders. There was at least 699 FDNY firefighters plus whatever civilians and New York Telephone employees that were impacted by this smoke. Here's Danny.
That night and the following days, firefighters who went unconscious were rushed to Bellevue. And as I said, we all this was quite new to us. And out of the 699 that were on scene, 239 of us, what we call tapped out, we went sick. We went sick right there in the street. And this is in an era in the mid-70s in our so-called warriors where going sick was literally frowned upon. It was, oh, you didn't go sick, you're a man, you stayed, and if you went sick, your lieutenant had all of this. So to have that many guys, and 239 was wrong. We should have had 500 firefighters go sick at this. We had firefighters lying in the street, leaning up against buildings. They had evacuated the building twice and then went back in for a third time. And then, in the days and weeks that followed, it was like, oh man, what's the flu or something? It was terrible. It was like the stench that was in our bodies.
Billy, I'd love for you to comment on what Dan just talked about.
Well, it's the beginning of the end. We just didn't know it, right? They had, I'm sure, in their minds, and remember that Danny just talked about it perfectly. The culture back then was you didn't get sick. You didn't admit to any of that, right? That was that generation, the World War II guys, the Vietnam guys. So you didn't admit to that. So just imagine being one of them where you really know you can't speak out about it, but something's wrong. Something's going on. And I'm sure they had signs, whether it was coughing up black or whether it was different colored urine over time, but it had to be haunting for these poor people, these poor brave firefighters. I mean, look what they did, to then start thinking, holy shit, my outside culture is I kind of keep this to myself, even though they did tap out and go sick, how much they really couldn't share. And I don't know that there's any answer other than today, we encourage you, if you don't feel good, you speak up. It could be a pending heart attack or whatever it is. Today, we understand that. But my God, I'm watching that clip for the how many times, and I'm thinking those poor guys just wondering to themselves, what the hell's going on?
And then 2 weeks after that fire, Danny writes in the book, 2 weeks later, Lieutenant Maloney from Rescue 3, they go to a strip mall fire on 144th Street in the Bronx. And the lieutenant winds up being a line of duty death from that fire. That lieutenant was only 46 years old. And the autopsy revealed the amount of damage that this lieutenant had on his lungs. So while he was officially a line of duty death from that Bronx fire, unofficially, he should be the first death from the New York telephone fire. But it took so long to put all these pieces together, where today and what we did after September 11th was based a lot on what happened due to the telephone fire and the advocacy of Dan Noonan, where hopefully we can say never again, that we'll make sure that we are tracking this and that we know that we are, right. September 11th is being tracked.
Let me just add this on there, and maybe you can add a link to this, but the firefighter registry, and Frank, you're very involved with that as well. You can talk about that, but documentation is so critical. Ask any firefighter who's ever had a claim or anything involving cancer or disease. They want to see your history. So, Frank, do you want to touch on the firefighter registry that's going on right now?
That's a great point. The NFR, the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer. You could just Google that and come up with the website. And what we need is all active, retired, career, and volunteer firefighters. Even if you were a firefighter for 2 years, a volunteer firefighter, and you're no longer, that's the data that we need, because it's data-driven decision-making and data-driven funding for research, for support, for all the things that we need. But we need to get a better handle on collecting data that will be meaningful in the future. So I certainly, anybody who's listening to this, if you have not, or watching this, if you have not registered for that, it takes about 25 minutes to do. And, we could be saving lives in the future.
Critically important. Thank you for bringing that up. Next clip, we're going to talk, it's a very short clip. Dan's going to be talking about early detection, and then we can kind of segue into a conversation about cancer and cancer detection. Here's Dan.
As we know, Dave and Bonnie, as you guys advocate, early detection is the cure, is the key. It's the key to survival. Get it early.
Billy, I know as a cancer survivor, you have a lot to say about this. What are your thoughts?
Well, we have annual physicals here from age 40 and up, and so I was scheduled. I got my physical in 2000. 2000. In let's see, it's 4 years going back, 3 years going back. So It was basically the year before COVID, I got my physical. And my doctor said my PSA is starting to go up a little bit, but the doctor said we can watch it. And that's not an unusual answer. And I was like, okay, now I don't know my family history. I was adopted, so I'm missing that loop. So there's a factor in there, right? Any family history? Don't know. So then COVID hit, and nobody went for anything during COVID. I missed my physical, all that kind of stuff. So after that, I went back for my next physical, and they said your PSA is going up a little bit more. And the doctor said we can watch it, and I said no. So that's my first bit of advice to anybody. Give them one watch it. After that, nope, I want to go see the experts. I did. And again, this is a whole long story, but I'll keep it very short. I got checked. I got scanned. I got probed, and I had a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. If I ignored the physical, if I fudged it, if I pretended, and look, leave it to a firefighter. We're going to figure out a way to get around that. Or just get to it another time or reschedule. And nobody wants cancer, and typically the male and the firefighters, and I'm sure women to some extent as well, but males are known for this. If I ignore it, it'll go away. Well, prostate cancer and AIDS cancers are not going away. And I've got friends that we're going to bury in 2 weeks, a friend of mine, and because he did not go for checkups and he was the chief. So you got to get checked, and it won't go away. And I understand you don't want somebody probing your butt. You don't want somebody checking this. You don't want somebody checking that. I don't care. You know what? I don't care. Take your manliness and throw it out the window. It's all bullshit. You got to get yourself checked. And if you don't get checked for yourself, I want you to think about the people whose pictures are in your wallet, whose pictures are in their phone, your loved ones, your grandkids. I want you to picture you standing behind your casket, watching your family at your funeral. And now do you wish maybe you got checked because those people are counting on you? So that's one way to look at it.
I was wondering and thinking about Danny and thinking about how could you both just comment quickly on how he raised that awareness? I know he was very vocal, very honest, but Frank, do you want to start? What did you observe in how he was able to really spread that awareness and change people's thought patterns?
He was relentless. He was an absolutely relentless advocate to anybody and everybody that would listen to him. He was on podcasts. He made sure that he got the message out. I had long known about the New York telephone fire as a student of the profession, and especially in New York City. But I didn't know that they didn't have any recognition of it until I heard him on a podcast. So, and that's the key, right? Is that he was passionate and relentless because he knew that he was saving lives. And Dan Noonan has saved thousands of firefighter lives. There's no doubt about, and probably even outside of the fire service, just what Billy said, of people going and getting checked. There's a great organization out there, the Tech Together, and they say use the 2-week rule. If you don't feel well in 2 weeks, get it checked out. Whatever it is, get it checked out. You wait 2 weeks, right? If you know you were out doing something and you have an ache because of that, all right, then wait a little while. But if you're not, something's going on, you got to get checked out, because Billy said it right. There's people that are counting on you to be here. And I have a granddaughter that's going to be 3 in January. I love every day I spend with her, and I'm able to be with my family. And I know Billy's got a whole carload of grandchildren, and wants to be around for them. And that's the key, right? How do we get our young firefighters to become old firefighters and seasoned firefighters? And that's by being on shows like this and talking about these things to make sure that they realize that they're important, even on their first day of their career.
Just the comment was about Danny. Anyone and anywhere at any time was what he would share that message. So,
move into another clip here. It's him talking about kind of like the perspective of being an older firefighter and looking back and making the choices that we make during our career. So I'll let Danny talk because he says it way better than I could.
And we got to get this message to the active folks now that, yo, dude, I sent you 2 photographs, Dave. One is myself on the job or whatever. I think it's in 31 truck or whatever, great. And the other was me in front of Sloan Kettering. And what I wanted to do to your active viewers is to say, all right, this is great rock and roll time. Make the flag. Yeah, whoa, this. And the other one is, how do you want to spend your post-job years? Do you want to be playing with the grandchildren? Do you want to be at the tiki bar? Do you want to go to the racetrack? You want to do this? You want to enjoy a vibrant post-department life? Or do you want to spend it at Sloan Kettering every other day? This is the choice that needs to be made now. Now, brothers and sisters, it is now.
And that's the lieutenant, that's the captain's job. If the firefighter's not taking it, the captain or lieutenant's got to grab him by the neck. Don't physically do it because I can't be responsible for your violent streak. But basically, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. The fire chief of department, zero tolerance on no physicals. All the stuff we've talked about today. But everybody should see that clip of Danny. I mean, Frank said he's got a grandkid. I've got 6. I've got 7 on the way. Number 7 on the way, not 7 more on the way. And they're my life. They're my life. Them and my wife is all that matters to me. Everything else is gravy. These kids need me to be around. My kids need me to be around, although they not always admit it. But I want this to last as long as possible.
Sounds like there's no excuse to not listen to what Danny said. You know, I don't think there's anything any of us could say that could top what he said already.
Totally agree.
I'm going to just punctuate it with this last clip. It's short, and it's Danny talking one more time about how he's emphatically advocating for the change that we're talking about in the fire service.
And we want to take what we've learned and pass this on to our brothers and sisters so this will never, ever happen to them again. We'll take what we went through, and through folks like Chief Leeb and others, yes, the message has got to be passed.
So as we wrap up, Billy, any final comments about the fire we've been talking about and the takeaways for that?
I guess I want to highlight what I said before. If you've got all single family dwelling fires in your district, you should be an expert in single family. If you've got high rise, same thing. But most of you have large area buildings. There's a Lowe's or a Staples or a Whole Foods or anything like that. If you're not drilling, and I mean that means you reach out to the manager and say, when is your slow time? 5 a.m.? Great. I'll have my companies there at 5 a.m. before the store opens. We're going to stretch lines. We're going to practice. We're going to time. And we're going to do it over and over and over until you're not on the job anymore. I can't emphasize it enough. I'm on the fire department a long time. I still go to trainings. I still go to drills. I participate actively. And you got to stay engaged in the game or go or just leave. So that this fire speaks volumes. It woke us up to the issues of cancer. And I just plead with everyone to watch those clips of Danny if you don't learn from anything else.
Frank, did you have any final thoughts for us after watching that?
Do it for Danny, right? Think about, do it for your loved ones, do it for Danny, do it in memory of Danny. Mm-hmm. That might have been an unusual type of fire for 1975. It's not an unusual fire for 2024. The toxic chemicals that are in there. Make sure that you're maintaining your gear clean. Wash your gear after every fire that you go to. Never store your gear in your car. When you come back, take a shower, then clean the halogen. The halogen will never get cancer, but you have an increase of getting cancer, and you have an increased chance of dying from cancer. Use wipes while you're on the scene. Your neck, your head, your forehead, your arms, your hands. Just do simple things, because when we don't clean our equipment, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So do it for your loved ones. Do it in memory of all of our good friend, Danny Noonan. And thank you for having me on the show today. To be able to hear Danny speak the way you did this today was really fantastic. And I'm so humbled and appreciative of the two of you for putting the show together.
Well, we want to thank you, because the way we see it, he passed the baton to two of you to carry his message. And you've absolutely done that today. And the reason we wanted you both here was because we know you do that every day. And people need to know it. And they need to be ready to take the baton from you.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate you helping carry the message. And just as the book, those of you who are interested, Fire Engineering Books has it. I think Amazon has it. But we also, what we failed to mention is we created a website, 30fires.com, and on there is accompanying information. So let's say you study the New York telephone fire, then you go to our website. There's going to be more videos, reports, photos, so you can not only learn, but you can use that to teach your firefighters as well. So we're doing everything but shoving it into your mouth, and you gotta eat. So we got.
This podcast will wind up being a link on that website as well. And the other thing we failed to mention is that all of the royalties from this, all of Billy's royalties and my royalties from this, are going to 4 great organizations. We're not taking anything from this, and that's the Tunnels to Towers Foundation, the Ray Downey Memorial Scholarship Fund, the Firefighter Cancer Support Network, and the First Responder Center for Excellence.
Incredible way of taking the book and just kind of exponentially playing forward what it can do, not only as a tool, but also to benefit other organizations. So we are so happy to have you guys here today and talk about this. Obviously, not always the most pleasant topic to talk about cancer or the loss of someone that we love in the fire service, but as a tribute to Danny and to pay forward his life and his mission, I feel like we did a respectable job today of carrying that forward. So I want to thank you both for being here. We'll share some links where folks can get in touch with you, and we wish you all the best. Thank you for sharing everything you did.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you both.
Remember to like and subscribe. We're on YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Until the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself. Take care.